The Tennessee Titans have a new left tackle. What does this mean for J.C. Latham? What does this mean for the Titans draft strategy? And what else are they going to do in free agency? This is the Music City Audible reacting to the Dan Moore signing. Let's get to it. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Music City Audible podcast presented by Broadway Sports Media in partnership with 440 Sports. I'm Justin Graver. With me, as always, Justin Melo. And Justin, we didn't have a plan for this week other than to come on here and react to whatever the Titans decided to do. Well, they were pretty active in the first few hours of the free agent negotiating window, legal tampering period, as they call it, which started on Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And the Titans signed left tackle Dan Moore, originally drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers, has spent the first 4 years of his career in Pittsburgh, will now man the left side, we are told, of the Titans offensive line. How's it going?
Yeah, it's funny, like Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker had certainly said that they wanted to build this team through the draft, wouldn't be big time spenders in free agency. It always felt like if they were going to deviate from that plan at all, even just slightly, it was going to be to upgrade the trenches and to upgrade the offensive line, right? Mike Borgonzi, I believe, said it at the Senior Bowl that the trenches would be their number one priority this offseason. And he's a man of his word, right? Dan Moore, 4-year contract, like you said, I think it just surpasses $80 million slightly. And there's $50 million in total guarantees. I don't know if you want me to give some quick fire rapid thoughts. I mean, look, You want to get the negative out of the way. I think there's no doubt that they've overpaid. Right. And I think whoever was going to sign Dan Moore overpaid. And I don't think the Titans were the only team willing to do this deal, if that's what you thought. Right. Like Jordan Schultz, very strategically, obviously, getting information from the agent, tweeted on Monday morning before the window opened that Dan Moore's market was red hot and that it could approach or surpass $20 million per year. Well, essentially bang on, with the Titans essentially coming in at $20 million. He was the top tackle on the board, right? And let me be clear, though, that's not trying to be biased or sell you rainbows. A bad tackle market, right? Like once Alaric Jackson was re-signed by the Rams and Ronnie Stanley was re-signed by the Ravens, probably missing one or two there, but it was pretty clear that the tackle market was not going to be a very good one, as it usually isn't, right? It's not breaking news that teams retain good offensive tackles. That's just the way that it goes. So they end up going with Dan Moore, 4 years, $20 million per year. It's an overpay, again, no doubt about it. But it does upgrade the offensive line, in my opinion. So I'll throw it back to you, but maybe I'll quickly touch on the positional switch there.
Well, wait, let's talk. Hang on, before we get to that, let's talk the salary because you mentioned it. But let's talk about what that means in context of the rest of the league. So he will now be the 9th highest paid tackle in the NFL, slotted in between Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata. And we have to account for what we know is going to be a rising salary cap when we talk about the overpay, which I'm not disagreeing with you. I do think it was an overpay, considering what Dan Moore has been the first 4 years of his career in Pittsburgh. I mean, there were Pittsburgh fans replying to the Schultz tweet that you referenced this morning, saying any GM who signs him for $20 million a year should be fired on the spot. Like, that's how Steelers fans feel after watching this guy play in Pittsburgh for 4 years. But $20 million a year in the offseason of 2025 is a lot different than $20 million a year in the offseason of 2023 even, or 2022 especially. Like, the cap is rising and it's going to continue to rise. Titans are sort of getting ahead of what will be a rising cap and a rising tackle market by signing him this year to a 4-year deal. It's only $50 million guaranteed. So if you do like some quick mental math, you can extrapolate that they probably have an out in the contract after 3 years. They may even have an out in the contract after 2 years. He's only 26 years old. He'll turn 27 at the end of September this upcoming season. And that's the money side of it. So yeah, you want to talk about how it affects the rest of the Titans offensive line, because we went into this offseason saying, man, the Titans from left tackle to center are solid. They need a right tackle, and they could use a right guard upgrade. Well, it's been reported in numerous places already that the Titans are planning to start Dan Moore at left tackle, which is where he's played his entire career for Pittsburgh outside of, I believe, one snap out of his entire career.
Yeah, it's a couple snaps according to PFF, but More than 4,000 career snaps at left tackle. If that's not a tell, then I don't know what is. I always thought they'd go into this offseason, maybe not hell-bent on moving J.C. Latham to right tackle, but at least open to the possibility, because that way you don't have to be hyper-focused on acquiring one type of player. They left their options open. I think that makes sense. They end up deeming that Dan Moore was the best option. So they're going to go ahead and move JC to the right side, where he played his entire college football career at Alabama. I mean, we spent all of last offseason talking about, he can play left tackle. He played it in high school. I think you and I did a 3-part series about him playing left tackle in high school on here. And I don't think he was bad at left tackle. I thought he was totally fine. My evaluation during the draft is that he was a right tackle through and through. I remember saying that on here before they drafted him. So I was initially surprised when they moved him to the left side. I got on board as you started hearing Bill Callahan talk, and we talked to some of his old coaches in high school where they first made him a left tackle. So I thought it was fine, but I do think the move to right tackle will be good for him, and more to his more natural position. Initially, I was worried, is Dan Moore good enough to tinker with J.C. Latham's development? But, we'll revisit that when we have the actual facts in terms of how he plays. But I think the Titans are obviously comfortable with it. I don't think J.C. is opposed to it at all. He's super comfortable at both. And the last thing I'll touch on is I've seen some people talk about this is not really an upgrade from NPF, and you're going to get into the advanced metrics. We're going to give you guys some great info here, but even just on the eye test, and I'm not the biggest Dan Moore fan in the world. I think they overpaid. I think he's a league average starter, quote unquote. It's a lot better than what NPF is, though, right? Like NPF is not a league average starter. NPF is not a below average starter. NPF might be the worst starter in the NFL. So there is a big difference between league average tackle play and worst tackle play in the league. And on top of it, the Titans probably feel like they're upgrading 2 positions, right? Because they'll get Dan Moore, who's super comfortable on the left side, and they'll move JC to the right side. And hopefully NPF won't necessarily have to play another snap for them, at least during a regular season. So certainly an interesting move here that hopefully upgrades both offensive tackle spots.
Yeah, when you talk about, Dan Moore, the player, and you said I'll give the advanced stats, so let's get into that. Last season, he allowed 12 sacks, which was the most allowed sacks in the NFL. This is PFF tracking, and if you want to say, that's Russell Wilson and Justin Fields' fault, maybe it is. It's great. We're PFF, so we're taking it all with a grain of salt. But PFF technically, or at least they say, they attribute sacks given up to players. Like if the quarterback was responsible for the sack would not be attributed to have been given up by Dan Moore. So I wouldn't use the argument that it's because of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. Now, if you want to use the argument that those guys don't have great pocket presence, especially Justin Fields' first 5 years of his career, not having, a good sense of...
Neither of them do.
Neither of them... Bad. I mean, yeah, they're both guys that like to hold the ball for a long time and wait for things to develop. Justin Fields especially has had trouble holding the ball too long. Russell Wilson famously did it in a way that worked to creating big explosives down the field, somewhat similar to what I like about Cam Ward, although Russell Wilson hasn't been good at doing that for years now. Like that was how he got the way that, to the let Russ cook moonball era. That was a different era, and that's when but he still tries to play like that. And so, yeah, maybe you can say that they held the ball too long. But again, PFF wouldn't have credited the sacks to Dan Moore if they thought it was because Russell Wilson, Justin Fields held the ball too long. So most sacks allowed in the league last season, 41 pressures allowed in 2024, which was tied for the 9th highest among all offensive tackles. Those are pretty bad numbers, but there are people who watch a lot more tackle tape and trench play tape than I do who have come out and said that I actually like this signing. Brandon Thorne, who may be the most famous, Twitter guy for offensive line play, tweeted, "I get the Dan Moore signing even if it's pricey for the Titans because it improves 2 positions, left tackle and right tackle, with Latham sliding over. Considering how bad the right side was there last year, the addition of a young, experienced left tackle in Moore, which is rare to find in free agency, under an elite line coach, makes sense." Nate Tice quote tweeted the news from Rappaport and said, "Dan Moore had become a solid starter at the left tackle spot in Pittsburgh. This should give the Titans some comfort to move J.C. Latham back to the right side and finally fill that gaping hole." And then I actually quote tweeted Tice's tweet and said, Dan Moore allowed 41 pressures and 12 sacks last season. And he replied and said, "Try to use the eye test for this, but Moore finished with a one-on-one QB pressure rate of 10.3%, identical to Colton Miller and slightly better Then players like Ronnie Stanley and Jack Conklin, 9.6% was league average. So you said it, he's just about league average. Moore allowed 48 one-on-one pressures last year. Stanley allowed 49. Colton McKivicks allowed 48. Jack Conklin allowed 47. And he also said the Pittsburgh offense did help the O-line a good amount, but the QBs and lack of weapons hindered it just as much. I get the concerns when you're giving up that much money, but I think they don't want to go through another season with that right tackle situation. I have more to talk about on this advanced stat stuff, but I'll turn it back to you first.
Yeah, I think what you're getting here is league average, left tackle play, and that's harder to come by than most realize. It sounds like a really bad thing or not a great thing, but again, it's really hard to find quality tackle play in the NFL. It just is, and I do want to point out to something that happened in Pittsburgh. Now, two things are true: one negative, one positive, and I want to give you both. They've been trying to replace him for a couple years, it feels like, right? Like they drafted tackles in back-to-back years. Broderick Jones in the first round, I meant to say. Broderick Jones in 2023 and Troy Fautanu in 2024, right? Well, Broderick Jones comes in, I believe was a left tackle at Georgia in 2023. Comes in, they put him on the right side. They go, we have a hole on the right side, and we've got Dan Moore Jr. We're going to keep playing Dan on the left, and we'll play Broderick on the right. That was a compliment to Dan Moore, right? A bigger compliment to him, well, first as a negative, the next year they draft Troy Fautanu, a college right tackle from Washington, right? So the plan, initially people thought they're going to move Broderick Jones to left tackle, get rid of Dan Moore, start Troy Fautanu on the right side. Well, that didn't happen because Dan Moore kept his starting job. It was more a reflection of Troy not winning that job, not being ready to take that job from Moore. So Broderick Jones played a second year this year at right tackle, and Dan Moore kept his job again. So now finally they're going to, looks like, go to Broderick Jones at left tackle, Troy Fautanu at right tackle. I mean, you can't use back-to-back first-round picks on tackles and not play them. So this has been in the weeds for a while, but Dan Moore fought it off for as long as he could, I would say. And I want you to give a couple more of the advanced stats because I do think there are some other interesting things here that indicate maybe this could work out a little better for the Titans than initial reaction says.
Yeah, so Ken Moore, at K Moore Sports on Twitter, works for ESPN Plus. He tweeted something also in reference to what you're talking about with the Steelers. He said, I just spoke with a Steelers insider. This is what he had to say about Dan Moore Jr. Quote, he's not bad, probably more of a cap issue for us. I think the knock is how much better he could be, so maybe he hits his prime with you guys. That obviously is a big, endorsement of what Bill Callahan might be able to do with him. And if Bill Callahan wants him, then they must mean something because Bill Callahan is involved in the offensive line scouting process, even if he's not, director of pro personnel or whatever. So I think that's worth noting.
He's 26, right? Like, I think the age factor is important here as well. Like, I saw a lot of people saying, the Patriots signed Morgan Moses to like a 3-year, $24 million deal. People were saying how that was such a far better deal. I mean, there's a reason Morgan Moses's market was $8 million a year and Dan Moore's was $20 million a year. And again, I don't think it appropriately reflects their difference in skill per se. Like, I do think the Morgan Moses deal was not a bad deal, and the Dan Moore's an overpay, but Moses is 34 years old. That's a 1-year Band-Aid solution. I don't know that the Titans are in a situation for a 1-year Band-Aid solution at tackle. Did we really want to do this again next offseason, right? When we've been doing it for how many offseasons in a row with NPF and yada. And if you signed to Morgan Moses, keep in mind, you're keeping J.C. Latham on the left side, right? Because Morgan Moses is a right tackle through and through. Whereas I think it's obvious to say the Titans had some interest here in making a move that helped, move Latham to the right side. So I think that's important to note as well. And again, at 26, you're hoping this is a multi-year solution. He was a 4th-round pick that I would say played football a lot earlier for Pittsburgh than they were probably planning on him to. So when a guy's a 4th-round pick coming into the league, 21, 22 years old, those first couple of years, not great. Not shocking he took his bumps and bruises. Also not shocking that he's gotten better at about 26 years old in his 4th season. And hopefully the arrow continues to point up here.
And that will be a perfect segue into my next bit of advanced stats here because Dan Moore is coming off of a career-high season in terms of pass block win rate, where he was at 93%, which was the 11th best in the league out of 66 qualifiers, not out of 32, not out of left tackles, out of 66 qualifiers, and a career high in run block win rate at 76%, which was 23rd best. compare that to where J.C. Latham was last year. Granted, as a rookie, J.C. Latham had an 88% pass block win rate, which is pretty good for a rookie. You hope that he continues to get better. Nicholas Petit-Frere, 82% pass block win rate last year, 64th.
No way.
64th out of 66. So back to the point you made at the top of the, 82%, I said, which is ranked 64th out of 66.
82, I know it's confusing. 82 sounds good. I was going to guess that was going to be like he had a 4% win rate, I thought.
Okay, well, you're getting a little ridiculous there.
Am I?
4%? Come on. The point is, Dan Moore at 93%, Nicholas Petit-Frere at 82%. Yes, they gave up the same number of total pressures last year, but Nicholas Petit-Frere also missed multiple games last season, just didn't start for multiple games last season, whereas Dan Moore Jr. started every game for Pittsburgh last year. So you want to say that they're comparable. You made this point at the top of the show, but they're not comparable at all. Dan Moore Jr. is a massive upgrade over Nicholas Petit-Frere. Is he a franchise caliber left tackle that deserves to be paid at the top of the market? No, but he's not being paid at the top of the market. $20 million a year is 9th highest. That's top 10. It's pretty good money for a guy who hasn't shown that he's a top 10 tackle in the league. But again, 11th best pass block win rate last year. So we're getting closer to seeing why the Titans made this move. I've got more stats for you if you want them. Here's Dan Moore's pass protection rate in just true pass sets. So I'll give the sack rate and then the pressure rate. Sack rate last year, 2.8%. Pressure rate 10.5%. That was a huge improvement over his pressure rate of 14.8% in 2023. So again, a guy who's getting better, a guy who is actually, relatively good in pass protection compared to the rest of the league. 5 of the 12 sacks he gave up last season alone came against Cincinnati and Cleveland. Cincinnati with Trey Hendrickson, who was second in the league in sacks over the last however many years, and Cleveland with Myles Garrett, who's first in the league in sacks over the last same number of years. Can't remember the 2 or 3 years. Can't remember which one, but those two guys are 1 and 2 in sacks. So yes, the Titans have to play Cleveland this season, but they're not going to play them twice a year. They're not going to play Cincinnati twice a year. And yeah, there are some decent pass rushers in the division as well. But Dan Moore was the Steelers' best tackle. You just mentioned they were starting a rookie at right tackle this past season.
No, sophomore, I think.
Sophomore, Broderick Jones. Yeah, sorry. They were starting a sophomore and a rookie the season before that. So if you're starting Dan Moore on one side and a rookie on the other side or a sophomore on the other side, where's the help going? If you're only chipping on one side, it's not going to Dan Moore. And if you really believe J.C. Latham, who was a top 10 pick, is going to continue to develop and be a stone wall on the right side, now Dan Moore might be able to get a little more help than he was getting in Pittsburgh on the left side of the line with chips and extra protection, running backs, tight ends, etc. So all this to say, is this the signing that I wanted the Titans to make? Not exactly. I came onto our podcast during our free agency preview last week and said that they needed to sign a tackle that wasn't a below league average level player like they've been trotting out there year after year. Now, I did advocate for Morgan Moses. So it's funny you say you don't want to sign the 1 year ban. I actually advocated for that.
Well, it would have been fine, but I don't think it's the disaster that some people are making it out to be.
Yeah. But so my point is the Titans all offseason long since Mike Borgonzi was hired have talked about how they need to improve on the offensive line and win in the trenches and blah, 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 blah. So it's no surprise that the first move they make in free agency is to go sign what they believe to be their left tackle for the next at least 2 years, probably 3 years, hopefully even longer. If you get to the end of that third year and you love Dan Moore and he's improved a lot and he's become a veteran leader on the offensive line, then you extend him and knock out the last year of that deal that probably has the biggest cap hit with a lot of debt with zero dead money left. Extend him from there. And then if this goes according to plan, this is your left tackle for the next 10 years, right? So hopefully it works out that way. But we've seen
10 is probably a stretch, but it'd be nice to get 4 or 5. I think that would be great.
Well, yeah,
the duration of the contract would be
right.
wonderful.
But if he's
then
great,
I don't have to worry about it.
If he's great, then you extend him and you keep him around, and he's your left tackle. You don't have to worry about this position again for hopefully 5, 8, 10 years. If everything works out. Now we've seen these kind of offensive line signings not work out at all. I still have PTSD from the Titans signing Andy Levitra, however many years ago.
He was a guard, though. He was a guard.
He was a guard. I know, but still, offensive line to a big contract in free agency. So anyway, I think this is. I think it's what the Titans needed to do. Like you mentioned, it was a really dry market of free agent tackles. we talked about why they needed to sign a tackle last week, where if you go draft a guy, you're not spending the number one pick on him. So you go draft a guy in the second, third, fourth round, then you're relying on a day 2, day 3 rookie to come in and start at right tackle. That was never going to be a solution. So they had to sign someone, and they signed the best guy on the market after Stanley and Alaric Jackson were re-signed by their teams.
I will say, I imagine Brian Callahan is unbelievably stoked about this deal, right? Like he's very honest when speaking with the media, and that right tackle side just kept him up at night throughout last season, right? Like he talked about how he was honest. He said NPF has not played as well as he wants to. He is not playing to our expectations. And then interview with Easton Freeze in the offseason, he said, we just tried to get anybody in there that just didn't totally derail the offense. And they rotated through 5 players. And I keep driving this point home because I don't think it was talked about enough. None of those decisions were made to injury. They just tried 5 different players at right tackle because it was such a disaster. And they didn't find a single solution all year long. They brought in guys from the practice squad. They claimed guys off waivers. They tried whatever the hell they could. And it just didn't work. So Brian Callahan is stoked about this deal. No doubt about that. One final advanced stat I kind of wanted to point out earlier. You talked about the ESPN pass block, right? Even the Pro Football Focus one, as much as they credited him with allowing the most sacks in the league and how many pressures they credited him with, they still had him at like a 67 pass blocking grade out of 100, which is as you say, like if you follow Pro Football Focus as much as we do, you'll know that's not bad, right? And that does insinuate there's some wiggle room there. It doesn't totally add up that they've got this guy with 12 sacks, but they've got a pretty good pass blocking grade on him. Put it this way, the year before, they had him allowing several less sacks, and they had his pass blocking grade at like 39.7. It essentially doubled in 2024, so they gave him some credit there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, looking at those PFF numbers is important, and it's also important not to just look at sacks allowed, but pressures allowed, because once the pressure is allowed, whether or not that pressure becomes a sack is usually more on the quarterback. If you have a really elusive quarterback who's great at getting out of trouble, like say, I don't know, random example, totally unrelated to what we're talking about, someone like Cam Ward maybe can escape those pressures better than someone like Justin Fields, for example. But actually, that's a bad example because Justin Fields is, one thing he does have going for him is escapability. But anyway, I do want to
the ball too long, though. To be honest, it doesn't throw with timing and anticipation.
Yeah, he has always taken too many sacks, so that actually was a good example.
The last thing I want to say about this, is before people, because again, I know people, the reaction to the signing's been lukewarm. If this actually fixes the offensive tackle position and you get to see clean pockets, it's been a while since we've seen clean pockets in Tennessee. You're going to be so over the moon about it if that's what it leads to.
Right. No doubt about that at all. I mean, that's what you hope this becomes, is a fix. The Titans have put Band-Aid after Band-Aid over this offensive line, and it's not fixed anything. So this will hopefully be what finally allows them to gel and become a better than league average group. At least not the worst pass protecting group in the league like they have been in the last 2 years. The last thing I want to talk about with this signing is what this does to the draft plans, because I think there'd been a lot of talk that a lot of speculation that they might be looking to spend that second round pick, whether they trade back from there or stick at 35, on an offensive lineman. I think this signing, when you have on the roster now Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, Peter Skoronski at left guard, Lloyd Cushenberry at center, TBD at right guard, and JC Latham now at right tackle, that takes you out of the tackle market in the draft, at least in the first 2 days. Maybe you spend one of your late day 3 picks on some developmental tackle guy that you hope to grow into a swing tackle type of player. But that is the full extent of what they will do at the tackle position in the draft now. And I think before today, it was almost a foregone conclusion that they would draft somebody to be the right tackle of the future. Now we can dismiss that idea. I think it sheds a lot of light, a lot of clarity onto what their draft plans might be, what positions they might really be targeting, especially with the early picks. And maybe I'm just reading everything this way because I probably am, but I think that this is another signal that maybe they want to draft Cam Ward. And we'll see what they do with the free agent quarterback market here. But we're getting more and more reports over the weekend, and some of them are totally unsubstantiated and totally random Twitter accounts, but there's a lot of them that seem to be indicating the Titans really are starting to lean towards Cam Ward, or at the very least, don't really want to trade out of the pick unless they get an absolute haul from the Giants.
I'll tell you this. I mean, I'm not ready to say that yet because, Titans have been linked to Russell Wilson. That's not something we're going to cover extensively here unless it actually happens. But I don't know if that would take them out of the Cam Ward market. It might not. I'm not confident to say one way or the other. But I think they needed to upgrade the offensive line regardless, right, of what they're doing at quarterback. The right tackle play was so derailing last year that they had to do something, no matter who the quarterback is. You can't operate a friggin' NFL offense with the type of right tackle play they got last year. So I'm not ready to say that yet. I will add, keep an eye on Aaron Rodgers and let's see what happens there. If he goes to Pittsburgh, for example, which is the sort of the rumor, quote unquote. It'll be interesting to see what that does to the Giants' desperation for trying to trade up to number one because there's really nothing left, right? Yes, they could pivot to Russell Wilson, but I don't know that that's going to stop them from trying to trade up for a quarterback. So if Aaron Rodgers goes to the Steelers, the Giants might get more desperate, and who knows, maybe talks heat up between the Titans and the Giants, and maybe the Giants are willing to include that future first, right? If they don't land Aaron Rodgers, if they land Rodgers, they probably feel like they got a little bit more bargaining power and don't feel the need to make an aggressive move right away. Although obviously they'd still need a QB of the future. I still think it would make them stick to their guns if what that is we don't want to give up a first. Right, a future first. So keep an eye on the Aaron Rodgers market. A couple other things I want to hit really quickly. Titans re-signed Sebastian Joseph-Day to a one-year contract worth, I believe it was up to $7.5 million. He had a good year last year. Credit Mike Borgonzi for coming in and recognizing that. I think it was Chad Brinker who also recently gave Sebastian Joseph-Day as an example of a good move that was made in free agency last year. So no surprise they decide to keep him. They also used their tender exclusive rights on a couple of guys. Darrell Baker Jr. back at corner, gave them great corner depth last year when they had some injuries. Andrew Rupsich as well, who will come in and compete for a spot. Remember, they got a couple interior guys up for grabs with Corey Levin and Daniel Brunskill currently on the free agent market right now. If they don't re-sign those guys, maybe Rupsich gets in that mix. They need to swing backups. Especially at the interior with Kush coming off an injury. So I think there was Morgan Cox, who's never going to go away. What an absolute machine. I don't want to see him go away anytime soon. Back for, I think it's his 73rd season in the NFL coming up in 2025 as a Titan starting long snapper. He's one of the best in the league. They're lucky to have him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad you mentioned all those moves. Sebastian Joseph-Day, I think, is the one that sort of headlines the group as a guy that's going to be a big contributor on that defensive side of the ball.
And Keandre Coburn a couple days ago, we didn't talk about that one. You've kind of got your base set up here, I think, in the interior. I like Sebastian Joseph-Day and Coburn as sort of the 3 and 4 to the Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat's 1 and 2. So I think you feel pretty good about what you got on the interior. Otis Reese was part of that group. They kept him a few days ago as well. And they're linked to Dre Greenlaw at free agent linebacker, Josina Anderson with that tweet. We'll be monitoring that. Probably going to be a huge contract there. There's some, buyers. So there's some risk there with the injury history, but a really good football player when he's healthy. Again, if they do any of these things, Dre Greenlaw and Russell Wilson, especially one or the other, we will definitely be back here quickly with an emergency pod.
Yeah. Also, we didn't talk about this either, so I'll just say it very quickly. The Titans released Harold Landry. So we didn't
cover that.
Yeah, we didn't have a chance to cover it, but we did talk extensively about what that would mean for the Titans if they were to trade him when he was granted permission to seek a trade. So if you want to know our full thoughts on the Harold Landry release, which is now super old news, go back in the feed and find our emergency overuse of the word emergency reaction to the Harold Landry being granted permission to seek a trade. He lands in New England with Mike Vrabel. Where else was he going to land? But yeah, the Titans have a huge need at edge. Josh Sweat's off the market, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that position as well. Titans have also been linked to Javon Holland, apparently showing interest there. And Buck Rising reported this morning that the Titans are interested in Zach Wilson and or Mac Jones at quarterback, in addition to the report about Russell Wilson that you just mentioned. So lots for us to keep an eye on. And like you said, we will be back. If they agree to terms with anyone else, if they make a trade, which I'm not expecting, whatever happens, we'll be back to catch you up. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks to Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville for sponsoring this episode. And if you are not already, please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a thumbs up, like, and turn on channel alerts to get a notification every time we drop a new video. Drop a comment below. Let's see how many of you guys are upset with the contract they gave Dan Moore, and how many of you guys see it in the positive, like at least they have a left tackle now, even if he's a bit overpaid side. Until something else happens, y'all stay safe out there and tighten up.
a Broadway sports media production.